All right, we are going to kick off this week's exclusive conversation about build capable XCL, which is actually going to be more about customer education this week than the tool itself, but how we can support customer education use cases by using build capable XCL. Before last week's conversation, I said, oh, this is going to be a fun one. I do have a near and dear place in my heart around customer education. And I think it's been a really difficult use case to support for a lot of learning platforms and companies who are interested in supporting customer education and tracking what their customers are interacting with and what they're learning. So we'll get into that today. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of XCL, maybe we should just talk about what customer education is. So how would you define customer education, Rob? Like when you think about customer education, what does that mean to you?
When I think of customer education, I think of like companies that have products or services that they need to get an additional layer of content to those people that have either purchased a product or in the process of setting something up. And as an angle of the training world, of the content world, you bring up some good points. Is tracking is really something that may not be required in all circumstances or may not seem to be required on the front of it, but is definitely something that needs to be considered. And then there's challenges, right? There's specific challenges when we get to this customer education sphere, which is that we don't know when we're successful, we have a lot of customers. And we don't know how many, we don't necessarily know where they are ahead of time. And we don't want to barrier our additional and supporting content with a whole bunch of logins and registrations for additional systems and things like that. That's my view of it.
So when I
Maybe
think
too
about
much.
customer education, I'm a product person. So I think when I think about customer education, usually my default kind of thinking is helping customers understand how your product works or how to best leverage your product or the value that it brings, which kind of gets into the realm of product marketing, which maybe we'll talk about more later. But I do think that there's use cases around, like sometimes you just want your customers to know more about a topic. Like I know for Build Capable, the Learn X API course is an example of like just getting people to better understand what is X API so they could leverage it is a goal so that the whole industry gets smarter, the whole customer base gets more educated about maybe the problem, but also potential solutions. And I think I was thinking actually last night about how much when I was working in the pharmaceutical industry space a lot, how much pharmaceutical companies try to educate their customers about diseases. And what does this mean? What are the implications? And to provide resources so that those folks that might be having a particular problem can learn more about it before they select a treatment. And yes, I think my default on the product education side is like not totally off, but I do think there's broader use cases. And certainly for associations or nonprofits that are serving large audiences around a topic, they also have, I think, a lot of needs that aren't like product education-y, but more like how can we provide resources and information to our audiences? I try not to always think about my product lens when I think about these types of things. And I do think that there's some interesting challenges out there, which you started to hint at with the, hey, customer education hasn't been particularly easy for folks. So maybe we can talk about why. I think you hinted at one, like the you don't know necessarily who your customers are, depending on the organization. But what types of things do you coming from the technology perspective, what kinds of challenges have you seen with customer education in traditional tech?
Now, in traditional tech, it's like a two-stage problem. And let's use a lens to encapsulate this. It's applicable across all different types of product. But when you consider, say, a physical thing, a physical product made in a factory that needs some instruction on how to use it, set it up, get value from it, maintain it, whatnot, and so forth. When you send that product out onto a shelf to be sold, it gets sold, it ends up in the hands of another human being. If you'd like to provide some sort of training, it's either printed material in a box, which is non-updatable, that's extremely expensive and
Yeah.
wasteful, waste paper. There's that challenge. There's the next challenge of you can't update that content. That's that challenge. And then there's the challenge of when you have adopted the idea of, okay, all right, I'm going to deliver digital content. I'm going to make a storyline or a PDF that explains some things in more detail, gives some people some resources to really get through this process and transition. Then we run into the problem of how do I know if anyone's using this stuff? How do I distribute it properly? I can put it on a website and anyone in the world can get it. I can throw Google Analytics on it and there we go. I know 5,500 people have used this thing and I've sold 60,000 units, and that's a pretty good ratio. And someone's been reading something someplace. But I don't know anything about the content. I just know that it is either being used at what rate and maybe a little bit more depth than that. So the next tier would be, all right, I want to know who these people are so that I can reach out to them. Product registration comes up. So I put a registration card in my product. We've all seen it. I register, a customer gets an email and says, hey, click here to register for our additional content, whatnot. They click on that and they end up going through a very lengthy registration to create a user seat in an LMS somewhere or in some system. As the owner of this product, I have to start thinking about, is this of value to me?
Yeah.
By virtue of the fact I will get a little bit more detail, I will get a little bit more close to my customer, but I'm going to have this extreme expense.
Yeah.
I don't know how long this person's going to need the seat in my LMS. Each seat's going to have a cost to it. It's really going to get messy. And the data that I'm getting from my traditional LMS may not be what I actually want because that's training focused. It's not really content focusy. It's not
Yeah.
experiential. It's not gathering the data that I want to see. It's not really going to get that. Although I will be collecting things like demographic data and stuff like that will be useful. So there's numerous challenges involved and what we want from a product perspective, and this, any product really works, but what we really want, I think, is simplicity. We want to lower the barrier for the customer. Simple, a link, just like a link from a website, that simplicity mixed with, I want some data. I want to know
Yeah.
more than just someone clicked on this and they're an anonymous number in a database, in a chart, and on a report. But I want to know that John Smith clicked on this and John Smith had this experience. And from that, I can start to do a couple more things with my content. One is validate that it's even useful. I've spent a lot of money and time invested in making this content useful to train my customers. Are they getting value out of it? Is John Smith using support after that to complain about what's
Um,
not working with this product? That those kinds of data points are going to be really helpful later in reporting and analysis of data to figure out, is this program even successful? And I think when we pair that all together, there really is a hole in our industry that says, hey, we've got a simple system that can do this.
yeah.
Simple link, collect data, pair that data with other data later, and collect rich enough data that we can see how long someone spent in the training and what screens and areas in the training did they spend the most time? Did they open it a second time and review something? Have they searched through the content back and forward and are still filing support tickets? So there's a lot built into that. So that's the challenges from where I see it. And that applies to,
Yeah.
sorry, just the last things, because I could talk for hours, but that applies to a physical product, but also to a digital product, also to a service-based product. If I'm implementing something for a customer, the same is true. I can send out this link to my customer. They can submit that to their employee base. That can always come back and I can collect the same level of rich data. And again, that scenario, that works with an LMS. I know how many people I've made this sale.
Yeah.
It's a one-on-one sale, but it doesn't scale well.
Yeah. It's just on the customer feedback piece, right? Like when you're serving an internal audience or a known group of users, then you can more easily get information from them. Not that it's necessarily easy. Sometimes that's even still hard to get people to give you more information, but you can start to gauge sentiment analysis in a way that I think is harder when you're dealing with a broad audience of potentially unknown users and the kind of traditional tracking data that comes with an LMS, for example, is usually start, completion, and maybe a score, which doesn't tell you a whole lot outside of did somebody consume the content and did they complete it? And if there is an assessment or something that like data point that comes back, you can get that as well. But when it comes to customer education, the most important thing is to find out what are people finding useful, what types of content you're providing that people are actually engaging with, and what are they engaging with. And that level of detail in most platforms is difficult to get, like at that granular level of like, how are people engaging with your content? So it's a little bit of a black hole right now, I think, for a lot of folks that are putting customer education out there. You can get relatively limited data back. And to your point, there's also the licensing perspective of even if I do have a platform that is tracking this stuff, are my licenses costing me per user? Am I trying to cap or limit the number of people who can actually get access to my stuff because of cost? And what is the value to cost ratio that you have to calculate to figure out what you want to make available, which is a shame because I do feel like the more organizations can engage with broader audiences and general public and those audiences, the more they know about your organization, the more they know about your product, the more they know about your services, whatever the thing is that you provide. The goal is to get that information out there, and we've created systems that create barriers to that. So, we've talked about all the negative stuff. Let's talk about the good stuff. How can build capable XCL solve for this? And I know you have lots of good information. We have challenges with limiting audience because of platform licensing and pricing structures. We have problems with data. We have problems with the depth of data, specifically within content interactive data. Did I miss anything else?
No, you've got them all. I would summarize them in maybe two higher level buckets. One is my content being used and who's using it.
Yeah.
And then there is my content being successful, which requires that extra level of data detail that I think we're alluding to. And of course, what's the solution? And the solution, it feels like a plant, but here we are. It's
Oh,
XCL does provide a use case that solves some of these bigger problems. One, obviously, the number of users in a traditional LMS where you're buying groups of seats of student accounts, that it can get very expensive because when it comes to customer education for product education or maintenance education, you really don't know how many people you're going to need. And if you even had an elastic way to work that out, you don't know how long they need those accounts. Like at some point, you're not just going to want to pay and pay and pay and pay because your customer is going to stop paying. But they may need that content after the fact. So that challenge, XCL comes to mind as something that you can create a content link, and that link has an unlimited audience. Because the users self-identify, you don't need student accounts. And you can collect a little bit more information than just their name or whatever authentication credential you requested or required. You're getting that depth of data, and even an anonymous person having trouble with content is a sign that there's problems with your content. And even an anonymous person using content is a sign that someone's using the content. So those kinds of things can help correlate. Obviously, cleaner, better data, the better. But the flexibility of having a tool that can create a link that you can distribute that's that simple, that's that powerful. So it's that simple, it's that powerful. Simple, powerful confetti. So I think that's where we can focus. Today's conversation is we can provide that. And it's not just for training content. It's not just for storyline content. It's not just for PDFs. This isn't a marketing platform. This is an unopinionated tool that says, hey, put content in me and send a link. And I'll tell you what happened with that content. I'll tell you how humans interacted and experienced your content. And then later you can look at that data, that rather large group of somewhat noisy data, and make decisions about how you want to aggregate that data to get the insights that you need.
is there a chance that you can show that a little bit of what
Maybe.
XCL can do?
I can maybe be convinced to give it a shot. This is the build capable XCL. So essentially what we're after is this, is a link that can be distributed in a number of different ways. And we can talk about the specifics of how that's distributed and the usefulness of how that works. But essentially, this is what an XCL link looks like. You're met with a landing page that has some content on it. It's a form that the user of this link fills out. So anyone can fill this out. It's not restricted to audiences. There's no overhead when it comes to administration. It's a simple thing to set up and it's a simple thing to distribute. So this can go in an email that's after sale. It can go on a product page. It can go in an information mini site. However you'd like to distribute this, this is a good way to distribute a link.
To
Render.
clarify, and I think you said it, but I'm gonna say it again. When someone fills out this information, it doesn't create a user account. It just adds contextual data to the data that you're gonna save around what they're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, that's a point that probably needs to be made. Filling out this form isn't creating a user account. It's not adding to your costs. It's not adding to the bulk. In fact, the system is very small. It functions very quickly by virtue of the fact that there aren't these user accounts. And there's also nowhere that a users per se can log in. This simply collects data one way. As the user, as anybody at email.com, click continue. Now we're sending data to me as the administrator. I'm seeing the data that this person's using, but they have no responsibility to return to find out how they did. That's not important. The use case here is not to give them access to that. It's to for me to have it so I can create better content, make cooler videos.
From
Oh,
Jacob saying it's just
sure.
creating a unique record for the purpose of the LRS, and the answer is yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, it's doing, and just to get really technical, and I do this, so hold me back if I go too far, but while we were watching that video, a plethora of data was being recorded. Each piece of that data has this form's criteria inserted into it. So each unique piece of data is stamped with who is creating that data or whom on behalf that data was created. So when we aggregate the data, we have all this information in multiple versions. So there's no real record or learner record or user record to refer to as much as each piece of data has its own credential. So that's how that works from a very low level technical perspective. So we come back into our XCL. This is the administrative experience. I can go and look at the analytics for that particular, this is the Fiat 500e video, and I can see all the various different people that have used it. This is just a demo environment, so there aren't a whole bunch of people, but these are the number of pieces of data that each of these people have recorded. And there's anybody, we created 6 pieces of data, so to speak, and we completed it and we launched. There's the number of launched versus completed. So really basic dashboard data that helps us understand if this is even being used and who's using it the most. And then of course, the real power behind XCL is coming to the activity stream. And this is where I can inspect each piece of data as it comes in. Each piece of data is a unique thing. So each piece of data is a statement to a record store that has all that agent information that they typed in. If there is additional information that is included in that form, such as their location, a product version, something that distinguishes this data even further as something special, that can be included on the form, and that would be included with each of these statements. And then, of course, these statements can be aggregated in a lot of different ways using various different tools, and it's a standards-based storage of data. So this is how the platform works. We can also query that data with a detailed series of very, very detailed series of criteria and create a list of data points that we're interested in, if they are completion or if we're just looking, for example, if this video, for example, was paused, and create a chart of where it was paused throughout its timeline, or if people fast forwarded or skipped large blocks of the content. What did they skip? How far did they skip to? And then, of course, just seeing where people dropped off, how long people stayed in the video for. These kinds of things, we can get these different angles of data because they're not always important, not all of them. And we can get what we need when we need it.
Let's say I have an interactive PDF and I want to see which pages someone went to, where people clicked, maybe how long someone stayed on a particular page of a PDF. Are those all things that I can define that I care about and want to track?
For sure. So this is a link to a PDF. I can just jump into a PDF. I know we're not talking specifically about PDFs, but from a general perspective, I just
Yeah.
scrolled through a couple pages. I'll pop back out. And in my analytics, I could now filter for page 4 to see how many people out of the group of people that had this link, how many people saw page 4, and I'd get rich detailed information about that. I can download a CSV of just that page four data, and I can process that in a number of different tools or even just in Microsoft Excel and visualize how long people stayed on page four, whether they completed the document and got to page four, how many times a unique user viewed page four. Did they go through the document and find that they had to come back? Did they use the table of contents to get there over and over again? Those kinds of insights can help me make better decisions about the content, about how to update it or whether page four was even necessary.
As a product geek, this very much excites me that I can do this. And I know that once you download that data, Build Capable also has a tool, the Data Explorer, that helps you ask questions of the data within the CSV. So we can provide some context of, hey, maybe you don't have standard reports, you just want to ask some questions, and it'll analyze the data and answer those questions for you and create visualizations and all kinds of cool stuff as well.
Absolutely. So there's definitely an XCL GPT that you can grab up from the GPT store for free,
Yeah.
paste your data into it, and just ask it questions. Hey, how long did people use page four? You could ask it really high level things like, how would I improve my content? Or which users are using the content the most? Give me the top 10 people who seemed to have problems with the content based on how they've been using it. The AI will do its best to give you those insights. And for some of the basic level stuff, it's really powerful and extremely fast and doesn't require any knowledge. It's no code. There's no knowledge of having to read this thing. Leave that up to the machines because this was written for the machines. This is robot talk for anybody viewed PDF learning page number 1 out of 5, blah, 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 time, date, duration, yada. There's helpful things in there. And then, of course, once that's decoded, you can grab up your CSV. This makes it a little bit more human readable, putting that data literally into columns in a spreadsheet. And then the LLM can take that and just make sense of vast amounts of data at once. So,
Cool. All right, we're coming up on time, and I want to talk about
oh,
some of the cool use cases that
sure.
we can explore for customer education because I do think, unlike internal L&D use cases, customer education covers this very broad spectrum of things that you can do. As we were prepping for this call, I was telling Rob I'm very frustrated when I want to find information about a product online that it's one, hard to find where I can get that information, and two, sometimes it's not even available at all. And so I want to talk about some of I was talking specifically about these razors that I keep buying that I can't
Right.
find the blades for. But
And
let's talk
yeah,
about some of
we
the use cases. And you mentioned QR codes, so I want to take a look at how you can create a pervasive link that can be printed on packaging or put on a sign or engraved on a brick or whatever the case may be, and provide more context and content to people who are linking to it.
absolutely. So let's say we were looking at this Fiat 500 video. When I go in XCL, every time I've created a new link, it automatically generates me a QR code to that link. Now, the links are a little long, the QR code's a little complex, but I can download this QR code and do anything I want with it because this doesn't necessarily have to be an entertaining video. It can be a very focused instruction on how to maintain a product. It can be a very focused instruction on the specific dangers of using a product. It can be something very focused and it can be something very broad, or it could be an upsell to buy the next version of the product. This could also be a PDF. It can also be a link. This could be a link to an Amazon product that is the blades to your razor.
Which
So
would be
you can
great.
easily order. And this QR code doesn't need to be digital. It can be printed, as you say, it can be printed on the
Yeah.
packaging. It could also, and that's what that other presentation was. It can exist on the packaging, but it can also exist on the product, is what it was where I'm going with that. Speaking a use case of a razor, you throw the box away.
Right.
It's gone. But the razor remains. And the base that the razor clicks into remains. And there are things that remain as part of the product that a QR code could live on forever. And just like a printer, many printers do this already. You can use the QR code on the side of the ink to order more ink. Of course, yes, you can put these on boxes But you could also put it on a sticker and stick it right to a machine in a machine shop, if that's your business, or to the side of a computer that has some software that you want to train a lot of people on, that's a shared computer, or on a park bench to talk about whatever you'd like.
We were talking yesterday about my family's side project or now full project, which is a cider business, and how often we answer the same questions or tell the same stories about how we got started, how we make the cider, where we make the cider, and then some of the science behind the fun Sound Lab ciders. We tell the same stories over and over again. The concept that we could capture that in a video or in some content format, provide that for folks who may not be in our tasting room, or John and I might not be there to talk to, and they can still learn about the cider and get those questions answered, I think is really interesting. But my favorite use case is absolutely going to be when I need to build a piece of furniture or build anything, and you get those paper instructions that are incredibly hard to follow and read. If I had those instructions with my product and I was seeing that people were getting stuck at a particular spot and they were available digitally, I could just update them with the latest information with the very same QR code link and be more responsive to, can people actually build my product? Have I been clear enough? Have I provided the right instructions? You could change all of that, and the link doesn't ever have to change. You can just update the content, and then you can track where people are getting stuck.
Absolutely. You can even shift from a PDF to a video to, of course, it doesn't necessarily need to remain the same. And then this slide just shows you some examples of pre-sale, some learning materials or deeper dive materials into products. This is stuff that's currently being used. This is stuff you can have access to with XCL. You can do this yourself and you can set these things up and get rich data about the use of that content and maybe figure out what stores and what posters and stand-ups have the messaging that have inspired people to read more. And then, of course, track how that additional reading has done, whether it's useful,
I
whether
love that we've been using QR codes now for a long time, and they've seen a renaissance, I would say, in the last couple of years where people are using them more and more. But what was often missing was the data tracking and kind of being able to measure the engagement and how useful they're being and where people are getting stuck, and how can you make the content behind the QR codes better, more meaningful, more engaging, all of the things. And I feel like that's where XCL really shines is, yeah, maybe you're already using QR codes or maybe that's already a strategy for you, but are you getting the data around how people are engaging with them? And are you refining the content and improving it based on those engagement numbers and data? I think that's incredibly useful.
absolutely. I 100% agree. And I was just mentioning this morning while we were getting started, when you start looking at how frequently QR codes are used, you see them everywhere.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
probably have 10 QR codes that I can see from where I sit, just on products that are in my vicinity, from printer to 3D printer to various chemicals to various things and pieces of equipment. This isn't an unusual use case. It's just one that I don't think a lot of people have had a self-serve access to
Yeah.
that's this powerful that collects this kind of data. So that's what we provide.
Jacob has one more question, which can one
Ah,
link track a user across multiple pages, say of a wiki? Yes.
yes. So yeah, for absolute clarity of data from a web link perspective, where we currently are with web links is one link, one piece of data. We really can't track once you've left the link and gone to the site. Couple ways to get around that. One is to have links to various different topics and provide a list of topics versus a simple website like a wiki. Or encapsulate the content that you want to curate for a customer into a mini site or something like that that makes it more simple or even a richer piece of data. If it's reading something, PDF comes to mind as something that's very portable and lightweight. You can curate the content that you need, and then you can track that content very granularly, unlike a website. You can track it with a lot more clarity and then update that content when you need to control the distribution of that. But certainly we can track any kind of web link. In the future, we'll have even plugins to track very rich content like AR scenes and VR and things like that. So this can be remarkably powerful as time goes on.
Thank you so much, Rob. This was, again, a fun one. Thank you so much for joining, and thanks everyone for watching.